On today's show, we welcome Sunil Patel from Tekmetric. Sunil's got a very fascinating story. I know I say that a lot whenever we have interesting guests on the show, which is every single week, but this story is fascinating. I was telling Sunil before we hopped on and hit record that Tekmetric had put together a video on his story that I was able to watch this morning. If you get a chance, go out and check it out on YouTube. But just a really, really fascinating background. So welcome to the show, Sunil. How are you?
I'm doing great, Jay. Thank you for having me on your show.
So as we were, I was watching this video this morning, and it appeared that you came from pretty humble beginnings in California and just kind of worked your way up. It didn't kind of come automatic that you were coming into the automotive industry. So your kind of origin story is very fascinating because that wasn't something that you were born into. It wasn't this industry wasn't something that really. I don't know if you even saw a line of sight to this industry, right, or early on in your career. But uh, let's talk about that a little bit. You grew up in California. What was it that led you into the automotive world?
So I grew up in Southern California
Or
and
I'm sorry, California. Yes.
yeah, Southern California. Yep. And I would tinker on my dad's old 1978 Ford Zephyr station wagon. He bought it the year we were born, my twin sister and I. And we've had that car in the family forever. It's no longer with us, just to be clear. Uh, and it was just sitting on the in the parking lot forever. And I don't know why, but I just wanted to crank it up every now and then. And it had like an old six-cylinder engine inside of it that was carbureted, and it wouldn't start sometimes. It would take forever to start. And then ultimately, like dad and I just decided, like, let's just figure out what's wrong with this thing and fix it. And so we would go to the local parts store, we would buy parts for it, and then he and I would replace a bunch of parts. I think he tried to fix things on the car, like such as the timing of the engine. He didn't really understand how a timing gun worked at the time. But ultimately, that's where I kind of started tinkering in cars over time. And I really enjoyed it. There was just something about taking vehicles apart, putting them back together, and then getting them back to their original state, their operating state was something fun for me. So that's how my career in automotive started.
Were you ever afraid that it wasn't going to go back together all right? I mean, if it's a family vehicle and you're relying on it, I know when I was young, I was always terrified if I were to put something back together and it didn't work. So you probably had a little bit of a different mindset there.
Yeah, so this was just to be clear, this was the spare car. My dad was the
Spare
only
car.
driver in our family. My mom did not drive ever, even up until now. And so it was a spare car. And so if it didn't go back together or something broke, my dad didn't really care. So that was nice to have that.
Yeah. And so you kind of had this interest in tinkering on cars, but that didn't immediately parlay into a career in automotive, did it?
It did not. So my parents always wanted me to be a physician. And I can remember even up until like I was 10 years old, we would have relatives come over to the house and they would tell my relatives, like, my son's gonna be a doctor. And I'm like, how do you know that? Like, I'm 10 years old. And I guess the constant brainwashing over the years and years and years ultimately led me to, I graduated high school early. I did it in 3 years instead of four. I just wanted to be done with it. And I just want to go straight to med school. So I found a program overseas. I went to med school and ultimately completed my medical school training and my internship over there, came back to the US, joined Baylor College of Medicine's internship program here in Houston, actually, and decided that like medicine wasn't really my thing. So my wife and I both graduate, we were classmates from med school, and she got into infectious disease. I'm sorry, she got into internal medicine initially in Henry Ford Hospital in Michigan. And so I was just waiting with her. I was not into medicine. I didn't really want to become a doctor. I was kind of like trying to figure out what I'm going to do, and ultimately decided to take my vehicle in for an alignment at a local repair shop over there. And I just like I looked on the local online Mercedes-Benz forums called I think it was called mbworld.org, and it's still a very active forum today. And so I would go on the forum, and I had a pretty big presence on the forum, and I just asked a bunch of guys, hey, who do you recommend for an alignment in Detroit area? And they recommended me to this particular shop in Commerce Township, Michigan. I take my vehicle in there for an alignment. and ultimately got to know the owner of the shop over there, who happens to be a radiologist that quit practicing radiology to open his automotive repair shop. And that was the moment that it clicked for me, where I came home, told my wife, I am done with medicine. I'm going to open an automotive repair shop.
What was his story to step out of radiology to start an automotive shop? Similar to you, right? Like kind of a wide swath or a completely different pivot.
Yeah, so he's got an interesting story too. He's actually also a master electrician. He's also a pilot. He's a physician, and now he also runs his repair shop. So I think uh, I started doing some research on this particular topic of how people are switching careers. So like any vastly different careers and hobbies. And so my wife helped me introduce me to this word called a polymath, which I did not know what that meant at the time, up until last week. Let me just put it that way. And so, and she explained to me that your life has always been like this, where you dive into so many different things. And if you just stay focused on one thing, you'll actually not be successful. The ability to be able to go into so many different areas in life actually helps you in your full-time day job. So that's, and
Wow.
I thought about that, and I think there's a lot of truth to that.
I think that alone helps pique curiosity, right? When you're going through life, and a lot of times maybe it can get mundane, or don't want to say boring, but maybe you're not challenging yourself to what you could challenge yourself to be. Maybe introducing something completely different just helps maybe generate that part of your brain or activate that part of your brain to where you are curious, and it is maybe a little bit more exciting than your normal day to day.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you go down the automotive path and eventually start your own shop, right?
Yep.
Is that correct?
That is correct. So I came to Houston to find a place to build a repair shop, and ultimately found an empty building. There was a warehouse that used to be owned by a company called Granger. They're a pretty large industrial parts distribution company in the US. And so I rented the building out. It was $10,000 a month for a 10,000 square foot building. I did not know how I was going to come up with the money, signed the lease, and ultimately raised a little bit of money from my cousins and a friend and started the repair shop. And I didn't really like, I did actually build a business plan, but I don't know if I really stuck to the business plan. But ultimately, at the end of the day, everything worked out, right? So I ran that repair shop. We were profitable the first year. We did about 750K in annual revenue that first year. And then we jumped to like 1.2, 1.6, and then we just kept on going up all the way to close to 2.8 million in revenue annually.
Did you know anybody in Houston when you went? Or why Houston?
My twin sister, my twin sister happens to be living in Houston. I wanted to be somewhat close to family, and then we were in the process of relocating my parents to Houston too. So that's how Houston started.
Interesting. So you're moving there. I can't imagine you had a whole lot of connections or contacts there when you go.
No, I didn't actually have any Jay. I didn't really have any connections in the industry. It was just I had a pretty large virtual presence on the online forums. And so as soon as the local Houston crowd came to know that I was opening a repair shop for European cars, a few of them started bringing their Mercedes to me for service. And a lot of it was just word of mouth. And then we would we built these trifold brochures, and then we would go to the mall parking lot and we would stick them on the windshield of cars. That did not work, just to be clear. Like, I don't even think I got a single customer from that effort. But and then I tried to do Google AdWords myself because I couldn't afford to hire an SEO specialist. And a lot of it was just like trial and error and just learning.
I Trial and error is easy to say when you've got money, but when you don't have money, how difficult is that trial and error? Because that is, you hear it from so many business owners that, I think they'd love to do trial and error on a lot of things, but maybe don't quite understand how to do it without a budget.
True. Mine was very risky, and look, at the end of the day, it worked out. I do not recommend anybody does it the way I did it.
I think we're all that way. Was it scary? Like
It
when you're
was.
going down and you
You
sign
know,
that lease?
I would say it wasn't scary for me at the time, although I was married, I didn't have any kids, and my naiveness just doing this without thinking about it actually helped me.
Mm. it pushes you, right? Like
Yeah.
you
You
have
just
to.
stay focused in the moment and you just keep pushing yourself.
How many hours were you working a day when you first got to Houston?
12 to 14 hours a day, mornings. And then so I would take in vehicles in the morning, talk to customers, occasionally work on, and remember, this is just me inside this entire building. And then ultimately I would try and fix the vehicles at night and then rinse and repeat. And then it got to the point after like 4 or 5 months, I couldn't do it anymore. I needed some help. And so I hired my first technician, and that took a lot off my plate.
I don't think people understand the what you took on there, right? We talk a lot about the Tekmetric stuff and all the great stuff you've done there, but that step right there and those long hours and just trying to make it work, I give you so much credit because that is, and maybe it's because you're doing what you love that maybe it doesn't feel like work as much, but there had to have been some stress there, right? And making sure that you could pay the bills and making sure that the work is still coming in the door so that you have something to pay the bills with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. Yeah. So you get the shop up and going. Your first hire, is that a technician?
It was a technician from the Mercedes-Benz store, the local Mercedes-Benz store here in Houston. And he stuck around with me for a good 5, 6 years, I think.
Wow. Wow. And was there any kind of getting to know each other as he comes in, and maybe you always kind of hear of technician turn manager, and maybe sometimes their expectations don't align with that new person coming in, or maybe that person, we always call it like the Michael Jordan effect or Wayne Gretzky effect, right? Where you have this excellent tech that brings somebody in and maybe they can't do all the same things that I as a person can do in terms of fixing a car. Did you experience any of that, or was it pretty seamless?
It was fairly seamless. He was a very strong technician. He would be able to diagnose and replace parts very quickly. On the electronic side is where he struggled a little bit. So that's the part I actually enjoyed working on. And so using an oscilloscope and looking at waveforms and looking at wiring diagrams. So those are or programming, coding, CAN bus networks. That's stuff I really enjoyed. And so we made a good team.
That is, you always kind of, I think, advice in general, surround yourself with folks that might not have the same skill set that you do, or add something to your skill set. And so it sounds like you did that. Now, as you're building this shop, did it occur to you right away that, hey, maybe I want to start a software company someday?
No, no,
No.
not at all. So my goal was probably to build multiple of these repair shops. And I would get stuck in. So first of all, remember this idea of shop coaches. I don't know if they existed or not, but I wasn't privy to any of them. So I kind of had to figure out how to run the shop myself. And I think we were pretty successful out of a 5 bay shop generating about 2.8 million in gross revenue.
Insane.
And ultimately, I wanted to open more of these repair shops, but then I would get stuck in, it's already hard enough with the like hiring the people and the talent. And then what if somebody's absent? And then I was thinking like if I multiply that by a second or third shop, that's going to get even harder. And so later on in about 2012, I started a vehicle sales business within my building. We cordoned off front of the building as a showroom. And so for about 2 or 3 years, we ran that vehicle sales facility. And we did mostly European and Highline vehicles, mostly the Porsche GT series, Lamborghinis, Ferraris. Those are the kind of cars that we would sell. And I had a business partner at the time. And then ultimately, I wanted to grow that business much bigger, and he wanted to keep it smaller. And so we decided to part ways. And so I'm like, you know what? Why don't you just buy my share out? I will go do something else. And at the time, I didn't know what that something else was. And so I started thinking about, so also at the same time, I actually switched to a on-prem system at my repair shop that kept on crashing. And ultimately, we struggled a lot with this system. And so I reverted back to my original point of sale system, which was also an on-prem system. And ultimately, what happened was I started thinking like, there's got to be a better way to build, like a cloud-based point of sale system. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I just knew like I wanted to get it done. I did program a little bit in the old archaic languages like C++ and Microsoft Basic, but those languages are nowhere to be seen in the space that, we operate in cloud. And so ultimately, I hired a local company in Houston to build our first version of Tekmetric back in 16. And this was like after I sold the vehicle sales business, I just had the service business. I was in the process of selling the service business because I wanted to focus all into the repair, the software, the Tekmetric system. And ultimately, the software that this company built for me locally was a disaster. Like multiple people couldn't log in. It was very slow. It wasn't even complete. They used a very non-standard tech stack for the software. It wasn't scalable. And ultimately we had to pull the plug on them and start all over. And that was a tough decision to make because I had taken in some money from friends and family to raise the initial pool of money to build the software, and ultimately it all went to waste. We had some of it left over still, but we lost a decent amount of money. And then
How hard, sorry, Sunil, I just want to ask you about this part before we move on. How hard are those conversations to have? Just being able to like have the confidence that you still have something there, but knowing like, hey, we need to start over again. Like we can't keep going down this path. That's got to be an interesting pivot and just a huge like risk. I think at some level you're probably trying to earn trust and trying to get people to, even though the first go failed, like you're still pretty confident in this thing.
yeah, Jay, so I never like I don't like sugarcoating things or hiding things from people. I always wanted to be very authentic with every that's just one of my life mantras is just being very honest and authentic with high integrity. And so we just were all very honest with them. Like, look, this is what happened. This is why it happened. And this is what we're going to do to prevent it from happening again. And ultimately, so there was four of us. One of the guys decided to back out and decided to, so we gave him his money back with interest. And ultimately, there was three of us left. And the three of us were like, well, we still feel like there's still something here. And so like, let's just keep going at it and let's just learn from our mistake. Learning from your mistake and growing from it is a true definition of growth mindset. And it's actually one of our company's number one fundamentals, which is
Mm.
actually the basis of and success of Tekmetric today. And so we decided to move forward with so I went to Scrum school at the time and decided to learn how software development should work. I also had this failing as a learning lesson on what not to do. And so ultimately we hired a UX UI designer to build screens for us for about 6 months. And then we hired our first engineer, whom now is our CTO, Taylor Fuqua. And ultimately, Taylor built a version of Tekmetric, which was pretty fast in response time, scalable. It didn't have all the features and everything today that we have, but it still like it proved a point or a concept that we have something, and ultimately, like I think we can continue building on this to see what happens.
Wow.
Now, when we launched it, soft launched it back in 18, 17, 18, it was tough still, Jay. Like I still couldn't get people to use it. I couldn't even get people to use it for free. And I still remember I was at my sister's house in Atlanta. I took a rental car and I was going shop to shop. And I would get kicked out of shops. I didn't have a sales team. And I would just try to get people to use the software for free. And it wasn't easy. And but I still didn't give up. And we got a little bit of a following online on Facebook through various groups. We would go to all of the trade shows. We would spend most of our money at trade shows actually, and try and get that because that group was very forward thinking, wanted to see what the best technologies are. Everybody was using an on-prem system at the time. And so we continued focusing on the trade show route, and we pretty much attended every single trade show that there was in the automotive space for the US. And ultimately, that gained us a lot of success, a lot of attention. Now, remember, at the same time, there's also competitors coming out with cloud-based point of sale systems. So my focus was like, let's just focus on winning. And it's also one of my leadership principles. Just keep focusing on winning. Don't shit talk the competitor. Just focus on winning the hearts and minds of users of the product.
And it's interesting with trade shows, right? Because I think early days of a company, we went through something similar on our WrenchWay side where it does generate a lot of conversations. And, I don't know if you experience this, but our early days, even to this day, really, like our booths were typically back in a closet somewhere. People had to really want to find us to find us. But, I think that helps get some of those conversations. Want to build a pipeline of young technician talent in your shop? Check out School Assist. Powered by WrenchWay and ASE, School Assist makes it easy for shops and dealerships who are looking for young technician talent to build relationships with instructors and their students. Schools post specific requests for things like equipment, tools, advisory committee members, shop visits, and more. Shops can view these requests and directly connect with program instructors all in one place. Over 2,800 schools and 2,000 shops are already using School Assist to build valuable connections. See if it's right for your shop. Learn more at wrenchway.com/school-assist. Link is in the show notes. Do you recall maybe first customer, first good experience where it just kind of gave you that warm feeling that, hey, we're onto something here. We're getting it.
I went so like we had some customers that were very interested in using the product, even though I knew we were not ready for these customers. Stefan Grabina, he owned a shop that mainly did BMWs on the East Coast. Scott Elmore out of Colorado Springs. And I'm like, guys, you guys are like much bigger shops and we're not going to be able to support. And I was honest with them though. I was like, I think that was the one thing that they really appreciated, is that I was like just honestly telling them we're not ready for you. And even then they were like, we see what you're doing. We've been watching you for a couple of months. We see how many features you're coming out with. We want to give you a shot. And so we did, and we got a lot of the early shop owners to adopt our product, even though we weren't ready for them. And they had a lot of workarounds to get everything working in the system to meet the same speed and efficiency that they were doing with their previous system. And it was just awesome and eye-opening to see how these customers just truly believed in what we were trying to do. And I think the biggest validation for us was in 2018, late 2018, Christian Brothers Automotive, at the time they were 220 stores. They put an RFP out. We were part of it. They had 4 point of sale systems and they gave it to us. And it was the same story. It was like, I was kind of like, are you sure you want us? Because, we weren't ready for a big enterprise customer at the time, but we're like, well, if we get Christian Brothers Automotive, we'll more than double our rooftop count. And they were a very supportive group of guys. They still are today. And it's one of the best run organizations that I've ever worked with. They're truly a partner and it's just been awesome to see how they truly work with us. And they actually, in the early days, helped introduce us to large parts players. We would work with them very deeply on feature development. And ultimately, they've been a great partner and they just renewed their contract about a year ago, I think. And so they're really a good organization.
Congratulations. Now, as you go through that growth, I know in my experience, one of the things I tell my friends and family is that I had read a lot in business books about growing too fast and the challenges behind that. And when we first started our company, I was like, yeah, whatever. And then you go through it and the hiring, the cash flow challenges that presents, the just, it's a lot to come at you at one time. Did you experience that as you're taking on a Christian Brothers or even some of those larger shops to start?
Yeah, so you have to think about when we were a much smaller company, we didn't have a people and culture department. We didn't have a true vetting process and hiring employees. It's basically like, hey, who do you know that wants to get a job? That's like who has a pulse in the industry, and let's just figure out how we can get them to fit into what we're trying to do. And then many of the folks at Tekmetric were multitasking, right? So they would do maybe sales and support and onboarding and product requirements, and like you just kind of did everything at once. And there's this a lot of startups have this. A lot of software startups have this culture where you're kind of doing a little bit of everything. And as the company matures, you have to put structure behind it. You have to put some rigor in your process of interviews. You have to scorecard employees. Like you have to do all these other things. And what happens is some of those early employees that started with you don't want to be with this company anymore because it's not the same company they joined. And I believe it's a natural evolution of a company. Um, I think it's very tough to keep that startup mindset as the company matures into much larger revenue multiples and numbers. And so, and it's the same thing we saw, right? Like, so we have maybe two or three people that started with us at Tekmetric that are still with us today. And now we're an organization of more than 300 employees. So it's just natural to see that attrition rate.
Pretty incredible what you've built. And as you're telling that story, it reminded me of our early days. And I found myself almost trying to talk people out of coming to work for me because I was like, uh, one lady in particular came to work and she was coming from corporate America. And I said, listen, make sure you talk it over with your family. Make sure this is not a certainty. This is so much different than the corporate lifestyle joining a startup. And she ultimately still made the call to come and had a very successful career with us. But it is one of those things where there's people's lives at stake, right? Not maybe that's a little dramatic, but like their their own family's financial future kind of lies on your shoulders at some level, and you don't want to bring somebody on and then fail and then feel terrible about their own, maybe they putting them in a bad financial spot. And so I always found it interesting from my shoes of like the pressure on a business leader from that sense, right? Of like, it's easy to talk about, but until you're in that position, it is it was a real stressor for me.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it was tough. Even I still remember like I wasn't taking a paycheck in the early days, even until we got Christian Brothers, because I just had to figure out how am I going to pay the engineer salaries. And we didn't want the engineering team to know that we were running out of money. And so we would just, I still remember I met a physician friend of mine. I'm like, hey, bud, I need some money. And so he wrote a check for $500,000 and said, I know you've got something here. And yeah, that was like a huge thank you. Like I mean, we paid him back with interest and everything over time, but ultimately, like it was, I don't think we would have made it without all of our friends' support. We would just be knocking on friends' doors.
Man, I think that's, part of our conversation today is on leadership. And I want to take what you just said there and kind of build upon that. But the perseverance that you've really established throughout your career, I mean, it feels like there were many opportunities for you to just fold up and not continue on. And I just want to understand like what pushed you to drive through these things, because these aren't easy obstacles to get around.
I don't think I've spent a lot of time thinking about this until much later in life. And so one of the things I said in that video that you watched earlier was struggle has created way more champions than privilege ever has. And I truly believe that because I think when you're faced with when you're faced with hard decisions and um so this goes back to that whole polymath thing again, right? So one of the things I didn't touch upon is I'm also a law enforcement officer. And when you're faced with life and death decisions, so it's not even life and death, it's like decision making, right? You're forced to make a decision in law enforcement and you have to own the outcome. That principle of being able to make decisions very quickly in a high stress environment, I have translated that to in Tekmetric. And so if you think about what leadership or what leaders do in our company or in any company, it is all about decision making. Like the most important thing that I have to ensure that we have in our top leaders is the ability to make great decisions. Because if you actually go into Adlerian philosophy, all of the world's problems are interpersonal relationship problems. And so if you distill that down to just human beings interacting with one another, all of the problems that we create in the world are because we create them. They're all people problems. And this is just my belief when it comes to SaaS software. If you have great product market fit, your talent is what's going to hold you back from success. And why is it that the talent is going to hold you back? Is it lack of decisions, maybe? Is it interpersonal relationship problems with other teammates? Whatever that is, there's a bunch of reasons why that's going to hold you back. And so we as a leadership team do spend a lot of time, especially when we're hiring executives at the company and we're scorecarding them. How do you make decisions? What's your framework on making these decisions? Because these are very important, large decisions, and I want you to get them right most of the time, not all the time, most of the time.
With your shop background, do you see anything that maybe that shop leader that's out there listening to this right now might be able to learn from what maybe you see on the SaaS side or the software side of leadership? And the reason I'll maybe put some context behind this. I think a lot of times we see a lot of struggles in shops because maybe they're not hiring the right people, or they're desperately hiring people and trying to get people in the doors. Maybe it's people that don't have a cultural fit. As you're going through and explaining some of your learnings, even from early days Tekmetric to today, do you see anything that maybe that shop leader that's out there could learn from your path and kind of what you've built out, and maybe lessons that you've learned from the software side?
So Jay, before I answer that question, I will first say I was a horrible shop owner. Because I was a typical, no, I don't want to say typical. Um, I was a kind of shop owner where I had a very heavy hand in trying to get my team to do things. And it was always by authority. And it wasn't by inspiring, it wasn't by motivating, it wasn't by mentoring. And I took a very wrong approach at running a shop, and yet we were still pretty successful. But then if I was to ask those people that worked with me back in the day, how did they feel about me? I'm probably going to get an answer something along like he was tough to work with, he was a hard ass, or whatever it is, right? There's the multiple things that would have come up. And it's taken me a long time to realize that leadership isn't just one thing. It's multiple things that you have to learn. And so if you're running your business as a shop and you want to be an amazing shop owner, there's a lot of skills you have to learn, and it has nothing to do with fixing cars. It's all about inspiring people, inspiring your team, motivating them, mentoring the right way. And then there's also this difference of you're trying to teach maybe younger folk, and you feel like your generation is the best generation and this new generation doesn't know what to do and how to live. I think that's just such a wrong philosophy. I believe it's the older generation that actually has to adapt to the newer generation and learn how to work with the younger generation.
And that's great advice, and I think something that a lot of our industry struggles with, right? You look at that service manager that's out there. I think we've got a lot of shop leaders that are very similar to how you used to be, right? Where you really rule with that iron fist, and I think at times it can create, maybe it's definitely more of a stick versus carrot approach, right? Where you're kind of making, I don't know. I grew up in that shop, right? Like in my family shop, my dad was that way, and it was until I left and went to other places to work that I started to understand that there were leaders that maybe didn't kind of have that leadership style. When you're young, I think I kind of assumed that, or when I was young, I assumed that all leadership styles were kind of that way. And had I been caught in the shop not actually doing something, I was going to get my ass chewed, right? Like it was not going to be good. And so it's interesting that you talk about your evolution as a leader, because I think that is a lesson that all shops can learn, right? Regardless of how good of a leader is in that shop or running that shop, that there are things you can learn. You can become a better leader. You can get kind of those raving fans within the shop that really want to go out of their way to help you out. Uh, I'm interested with your experience. What made you shift? Like what made you change?
Um, I think this goes back to always wanting to learn. And so I read a lot. I read about 2 books a month at least. And they're typically not, a lot of them are personal growth topics, but I just like learning constantly. And I think the hardest part for a leader is personal growth. And are you ready for that? Because I think the one question you have to ask, or any leader has to ask themselves, is if you reflect back on the years that you've actually been leading up until now, how has that gone? Is there room for improvement? Like, could you do things a little differently? And I always try to, so like I talk about this in my leadership team. To me, it's easy to find people to do tasks, right? Whether it's a great finance person, whether it's a great engineer, whether it's a great sales leader or an account executive, you're trying to find a person that's the best at those skills. The hard part about this is orchestrating all of those people together into one unison orchestra. And making everybody hum to that tune is not easy to do because everybody learns differently, everybody is inspired differently. And if you ask most people, like, what's the most important thing for their career, money is usually not the number one thing. Money is one of the things, but it's just not the top thing usually. It's basically, how does somebody feel when they come to work? And it's the CEO or the president or the shop owner's job to ensure that they create a culture at that company to make people want to come to work. That is our responsibility.
It had to have been hard for you though, because when you look back over the course of your career and the growth you had in the shop, at some level you have to kind of question, wasn't it that leadership style that got that growth, right? Like like when you had turned a shop that you started from scratch into that level of shop, there's got to be elements of that that were effective.
Potentially, Jay, but I think we were just so focused on providing great service to our customers and fixing vehicles and complex problems that other shops would turn away or shy from. I believe that gained us more customers and more revenue. But if you actually ask the question to our internal teams, what do you feel about the culture of your repair shop? I think the answer would be very different.
Did you think about culture when you were in the shop?
Not a whole lot.
No. No,
Or
you're
the
just day to day, get through the fires, get everything kind of taken care of.
yeah,
I don't think that's too different than a lot of the shops that are out there right now.
yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah. And, just to kind of continue on this path, we've done a lot of surveying of technicians over the years. And most times it comes down, you talk about those people skills. A lot of the complaints that technicians have are because of lack of communication or lack of respect, right? It's all kind of like you talked about in those interpersonal kind of relationships that create this lack of culture or maybe this butting of heads constantly each and every day. And, I think there are a lot of things that if that shop manager that's out there listening to this right now, if you were to do just like Sunil just said and kind of do some reflection and kind of look at yourself in the shop and how you interact on a day-to-day basis, I think there's always room for improvement. But even for those folks, like if they kind of question themselves on a Sunday night going into a Monday, am I looking forward to talking to the people on my team tomorrow? If the answer is no, you might want to change some things.
You're absolutely right.
This week's episode of Beyond the Wrench is brought to us by Jasper Engines and Transmissions. Okay, your customer's engine or transmission has failed, but now is not the time for them to trade their vehicle. Not without a working engine or transmission. Besides, would they have kept their vehicle another 3 to 5 years if their engine or transmission had not let them down? If you answered yes, then Jasper Engines and Transmissions is your choice to give your customer's vehicle new life and many thousands of miles of enjoyable driving performance. When considering the high cost of a new or newer used vehicle, there's a pretty good case to be made for replacing a drivetrain component that has failed or is delivering poor performance. Rather than trading their car, truck, van, or SUV, install a quality remanufactured Jasper product for less than your customer would have to invest in a new vehicle or a newer used vehicle. Check out their website at jasperengines.com to learn more about the money-saving value of Jasper. You're just a genuinely good leader, and you talked about the reading and how much that, that's important to you. I'm in the same boat where I love reading about leadership and love reading about culture and just ways to do things better. As you go through this and you apply the lessons of leadership that you've learned over the years, what are some key things that you would point out in leadership that somebody could learn and take back and use today?
Um, so I actually went down the process of creating my own leadership principles. And the leadership principles that I created were based on all of my readings and then how they applied to our company, Tekmetric, and how we've been able to scale and grow the company. And I would focus on areas that teams were struggling in. So like I'll give you this small example. Most companies they'll have a bunch of individual contributors. Let's just say a technicians, let's just use a shop example. So you have a bunch of technicians and you have this technician that's amazing at diagnosing vehicles and repairing cars as fast as possible, low comeback rate, and he just does a fantastic job. And then the first thing the shop owner is going to want to do typically is let's promote him to a team lead. And I'm like, you just took your best tech out of the field and you promoted him to a team lead. And that is just very natural to correlate personal output or an individual person's output to a promotion. And this happens not just in automotive shops. I mean, this happens across every industry in the entire world. And we as a company have started focusing on like, when you do that though, when you start promoting an individual contributor to a manager or a team lead, you are potentially giving that title to somebody who's never managed a human being in their life. And that's something that people forget about. Because if you're managing and responsible for another human being's success, that is not something that you're born with innately most of the time. And so at Tekmetric, we have actually started to build out our own internal program where we are training individual leaders to be great managers. And it has nothing to do with how they perform as an individual leader. They just have some unique skill set, the way to inspire, the way to talk people that maybe makes them a better manager than an individual contributor. So I spoke about earlier, like my leadership principles that I've created. One of my biggest, or my best, or my favorite, I should say, is speed and accuracy of decisions via first principles. And so first principles thinking is not something that it is a difficult concept to understand because most human beings start involving bias in decision making. And so Aristotle was the first philosopher that actually came up with first principles thinking. Our most notable and most famous person today is probably Elon Musk, that has implemented first principles thinking in everything that he does. So Elon Musk decided, so he first made an engine he basically emulated something that's been happening since the 40s. It's liquid oxygen combined with another chemical that provides the thrust in these rockets. But remember, the key difference that Musk wanted to do was he wanted to provide a reusable rocket. And what was happening though is like because of this earlier propellant, there's a lot of carbon buildup that required a lot of cleaning because he was reusing the rockets. And so he's like, let's wipe the slate clean and let's start all over. Because when you do that, if you try to build something based on how something else was built in the past, you're confining yourself in what you actually can do. And ultimately what it does is it limits the possibilities of what you can do. And so what he did was he ultimately got his engineers together and they built a version of this rocket, which is the cleanest. I think they're the only ones who use this rocket, but it's the cleanest form of propulsion with um, uh, also the most amount of power that any rocket engine is able to provide today. And he wouldn't have been able to do that if he used all of the, just used an engineer that built the previous rocket. You basically want to try and break that norm. So we do this all the time at Tekmetric. I'll ask our leaders to, like, let's just say that there's a decision that has to be made. Maybe it's around hiring somebody in a leadership role in the company. What you're doing is you're assessing the person's capabilities based on maybe your experiences in life on this particular role. And what I try to get everyone to understand is like Tekmetric is a very different company. I don't care about how you used to do things in the past, how you've managed this person before. I want you to remove all of that. And I want you to think about what are we hiring this person for at this company today? And then let's figure out what are the skills that we're going to test against this person to ensure that they're meeting the bar for this role. And what you end up doing is you hire a person that is very different than the person you thought you were going to hire. And we've had some great outcomes here at Tekmetric using first principles. Now, it is a muscle. It takes time and energy and skill to keep working on this muscle on using first principles thinking.
As it relates to people, is that kind of similar to getting the right person on the right seat on the bus, or is that kind of is that different altogether?
I think it's a little different altogether. Maybe there's some correlation. Lencioni talks about this, getting the right people on the seat of the bus. And I believe it's a little bit different because you're actually going a little deeper into understanding the capabilities of that person on the bus and trying to figure out where, I guess maybe, maybe there's some correlation, but you're trying to really dig deep into the capabilities of this person and then finding the seat for that person.
Is
Real,
that
go ahead, Jay.
well, I was just going to ask, is that how do you find that out? Is that through some type of aptitude testing? Is that through, just experience with the individual? Like, how do you come to the conclusion of where their best fit is?
A lot of interviews, Jay. So we spend a large amount of time in interview process because 1 or 2 hour interview is not enough to figure out how a person is. And especially when you're looking at executive level positions at the company, it takes a lot of effort because you're basically, remember, you're going to be marrying this person, literally. You're probably going to be spending more time with this person than your own spouse at home. And you're trying to figure out how this person thinks. And there are a series of questions you can try to use to get to that conclusion. But ultimately, I also try to look at the most recent decisions they've made in the last 6 to 12 months in the previous company to understand why or how they came up to that conclusion to make those decisions.
Interesting. And it so contradicts so many other companies, not just in our industry, but companies as a whole that are very reactionary in the hiring process rather than really going out and when you said the point about an hour or two with a person really isn't going to give you a whole lot of information. That is so true. And so, I think for me taking advice out of this, I think that is such a great point. I had, in Dave Ramsey's book, Entre Leadership, he talks about how he takes the spouse they go out to dinner together and because he said, I can hire this person, but if there's a disconnect with the spouse, that's going to cause a lot of trouble at work. And what you're talking about to me kind of falls in that same vein of really trying to get to know somebody in a time when that can be a real challenge, especially, we talk with a lot of shops, very reactionary in hiring a lot of times because, hey, we need somebody to work on this car. We need to get somebody out there as soon as possible. So we end up hiring somebody that's not a fit just because we have to fill a hole. And I just feel like that is the source of so many of our issues as an industry, is just maybe not being as intentional as we should there.
Yeah, so you bring up an important point, Jay. So spousal, um, the importance of getting the spouse on board with this big decision is very important. In fact, I have the numbers of all of the spouses of my leadership team on my phone.
Nice.
I do that because there is a text message that will go out every now and then to see how they're doing. I also ask my direct reports on how their spouses are doing because that time that you're going to need your employee to work with you for 10 to 12 hours on a particular project away from the kids at home, it's going to go a long way when the spouse is on board with what the mission of the company is and what this person's doing.
Man, that right there is, I don't do that. And that would be something I could learn from. And I think it's, if you think about the normal at home life, if that employee is having to go home and tell their spouse, hey, listen, I'm going to be at the office for a lot of time here this next week because we've got a big project that we've got to get done. Almost feels like maybe a little backup for the employee too, right? To be able to go in and say, we got this long road ahead of us here, and we need to put the time in right now. And it's not just like, yeah, I'm just going to go spend some time hanging out at the office, more time at the office, so I'm not at home. I don't know. It just makes so much sense to me. I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Uh, as far as kind of your vision for the future, and obviously um, you're an excellent leader. I've as we're talking here, I'm just taking notes and I'm learning so much from you. When you look at a software company and being able to kind of continually push the limits, my own family shop is on Tekmetric. I can tell everybody that's listening, it is fantastic software, very user friendly, very easy. How do you keep innovating and really even understanding what to innovate on?
Um, okay, so we have shifted as a company from a point of sale system to a platform for automotive repair shops. And the platform eventually will consist of the core and key things that a repair shop has to do. We have over 100 integration partners into our ecosystem with our API. We are not trying to replace all of those partners with building product. But I believe there are some key things that should be native inside of the point of sale system, which is like the core point of sale system we're going to continue innovating on. Payments is fully integrated and embedded into the product. We have a CRM product or marketing product that is fully integrated into Tekmetric. But if should a shop owner want to use something else, they're totally welcome to. We want to let shop owners to pick and choose whatever they want to use. There's a couple other things that are going to start working their way into Tekmetric, which is VoIP or phones fully embedded into Tekmetric. And then the last thing is the repair guide, automotive repair guide for technicians. And so like to me today, that's going to round out our product set for being a platform. But the sky's the limit, Jay. Honestly, like every 6 months, some new idea will crop up and we'll think about doing something that is tangential or in a different vertical or I don't know. There's all kinds of things that we can continue innovating on. But we just at the end of the day, like we want to provide the best platform for automotive repair shops.
Do you understand what to say no to?
That's a hard one. So several years ago, we were in Austin, Texas, doing an offsite, and we decided to make a decision on what we're not going to do. And so we made an intentional decision. We are not going to build software for heavy duty shops, marine shops, jet ski, boat, RV, motorcycle, like all of these other areas. And what we did was we said we are going to build a point of sale system for general mechanical auto repair. And we did, and we stayed focused on that. So what happens when you stay focused on your own little vertical is that all of your resources and your energy and your people are all geared towards winning in this one vertical. And we've been pretty successful in doing that. 2 years ago, we released a tire module, which is for tire specific shops, and we're continuing to work on the tire space. But I can't think of us going into any other areas right now anytime soon, because there's just so much to do in general mechanical auto repair and tire right now.
That's a really good, honest answer. And I give you, again, a lot of credit for having the discipline to kind of have that meeting, right? To have the meeting of what to say no to. I don't know that there are a lot of leaders that would have that conversation. And I think it's a balance between the hyper growth of keep growing, keep growing, keep growing, but also being like, I want to own this space. Like this space is our space, and we've got to dominate that one space. So I think that's interesting perspective. I honestly don't know that I've heard of anybody doing a what to say no to meeting, but I give you a lot of credit there too, just to have the wherewithal or the thinking to be able to drive that conversation. Now, as we get close to the end of this podcast, we have our 3 questions that are kind of maybe a little off topic, but a little on topic. So I'm going to start with if you weren't doing this job, what would you be doing?
Jay, I would probably do one of two things: be flying a plane or focusing on law enforcement and helping people.
The law enforcement thing, I didn't even get to ask questions about that. And I have so many questions about that in general. So that we'll have to have you back on sometime to talk about that. Do you fly currently?
I do.
You do. All right. How long have you been doing that for?
It's been about a year. So I'm still in the process of completing my private pilot license. But it is like there's a lot of time you have to spend in order to complete everything. So time is always my limiting factor.
Interesting. What was your first job?
Movie theater, the Dollar Theater in Amarillo, Texas. I was the guy that was cleaning the popcorn machine for the longest time, and then eventually became an usher.
Anything you learned from back then that you kind of still apply to this day?
Not from that job.
Interesting. Interesting. Last rapid fire question here. What time do you get up in the morning?
I get up at 4:30 in the morning, and I'm in the gym usually by 5:15, and I usually work out 4 days a week.
Good for you. Has that been consistent throughout your career, early riser?
It's something that's like I can't live any other way.
I see a consistent trend with a lot of our high performing guests when we ask that question. Very early to rise, get a lot of work done before anybody else is even awake. And, I think when I look at you as a whole, it's such an impressive career and really legacy that you've laid out now. And I think it is routine that really drives a lot of that, on top of you just being an incredibly smart person and well-read person and doing all of the wonderful things that you've done. So I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast today. This has been an absolute pleasure. I've got an entire page full of notes here that I took over the course of the podcast. Just really looking forward to following along what you're able to do with Tekmetric in the future. It is really, really exciting, and congratulations on everything.
Thank you, Jay. It was a pleasure being here with you.
That wraps up another episode of Beyond the Wrench. If you liked this episode, please show your support by rating and following the podcast. You can also watch the video interviews on WrenchWay's YouTube channel. Speaking of WrenchWay, did you know Beyond the Wrench is managed and produced by the WrenchWay team? WrenchWay is an online community dedicated to promoting and improving automotive and diesel careers. We help technicians find the best shops to work at, and we also help auto, diesel, and CTE instructors get more support from local industry. You can learn more by visiting wrenchway.com.